G'day guys, and welcome back to the Chip and Chase podcast. It's 4:25 p.m. at the time of currently recording this, so as of 25 minutes ago, we've got the Pre-Season Challenge Round 2 team lists that have just dropped on the NRL website. And as per usual, we are just going to go through, have a look at those team lists, read them out for everyone listening, and just give my thoughts on sort of some of the players that have been named. So, starting us off is the Rabbitohs versus Roosters, which takes place on Friday, 6 p.m. Big thing to note with these two team lists. Obviously, both of these teams go into Vegas to play in that round 0 clash, meaning their NRL squads or the players that they're taking with them for that are leaving before this game takes place. So, or maybe not before, but a day after. So the players who have been named are not going to Vegas. So this one, you're not going to see too much, and there's not going to be a whole lot to comment on, but I will read through the team list regardless. So for the Rabbitohs, at fullback, we have Braden Burns. On the wings, we have Jude Saldana and Leon Tahau. Adam Christensen and Leonard Skelton are your centres. Bailey Bentley Harpe or Hape and Jarrett Sublu are 6 and 7 respectively. In the forwards, we have Brock Gray and Yelene Gordon at prop. Ryan Gray is the hooker. Myla Aluni Chanfoon and Nicholas Halalilo are the second rowers, and Matt French is lock. On the bench, they have CJ Mundine, Cade Maloney, Chase Chapman, and Tyson Hodge. Now, for the Roosters, at fullback, we have Callum Gromek. On the wings, we have Alexander Young and Tarua Williams. In the centres, we have Kieran Fekatoa and Ethan Clark-Wood. At 6 is Kobe Thomas, and the halfback is Joseph... going to struggle here. Joseph Witakama Tamara Tapari. Butchered it, 100%. We move on. In the front row, we have Dylan Napa and Xavier Va'a. At 9, we have Tyler Moriarty. In second row, we have Corey Ross and Meli Nassau. And at lock, we have Celesi Foketi. On the bench is Benaya Laleo, Tyson Fakausi, Zach Sadler, and Taylor Lasalu. In case you couldn't tell by my butchered pronunciations of essentially every player on both of these team lists, a lot of players I don't know. A lot of players I haven't heard of. There's a few names thrown in. Obviously, Braden Burns at fullback for the Rabbitohs. Leonard Skelton's in there. Brock Gray, Ryan Gray, Yelene Gordon. No, like those sort of players. But yeah, there's a lot of names thrown in. So, of course, as I've just said, that the Rabbitohs and Roosters are on their way to Vegas by the time this game is sort of taking place. So it's sort of just a hit out for a lot of their younger squad or extended squad, if you will, in the case of Yelene Gordon, who's 36 years old, getting a run in at prop here. So when we look at this from a preseason and Supercoach perspective in the preview, there's not going to be too much to sort of to touch on. A lot of these players aren't going to really be making NRL this year. But, you know, we're still going to watch over this game and give our thoughts on it when it happens. In the Roosters, names that stick out to me, Dylan Napa back at prop. I was aware of him coming back to the Roosters last season, I believe it was, to play in their sort of extended squad and in their New South Wales Cup. I've always sort of liked Dylan Napa since he took it to the Burgess brothers. I thought he had a big future. Sort of tailored off, obviously, but you know, maybe a big game here could see him come into contention for the Roosters throughout the season, but they are pretty stacked in that front row department. Another name on there is Alexander Young, the elder brother, I believe it is, of Dom Young, who they've brought across. So it'll be good to see how he goes as well, getting a bit of action in his first sort of NRL, if you will, if you want to call it that, you know, taste of that. Lots and lots of players on the reserves and a lot of ins and outs, but we're going to sort of gloss over that and move on to our next game, also taking place on the Friday at 8 p.m. We have the Sharkies and the Bulldogs. So the Sharks line up with William Kennedy at fullback, Sione Katoa and Ronaldo Mulatalo are your wingers, Jesse Ramian and Siasif Talakai are the centres, Braden Trindle at 6 and Nico Hines at 7. In front row, we have Royce Hunt and Oregon Kafusi. Blake Brayley is the hooker. Britton Nicola and Teague Wilton are the second rowers. And Cameron McInnes is the lock. On the bench, we have Jack Williams, Jesse Colquhoun, Toby Rudolph, and Thomas Hazelton. Now for the Bulldogs, fullback is Blake Taff, Blake Wilson and Josh Adokar are the wingers, Bronson Xerri and Stephen Crichton are in the centres, Matt Burton at 6 and Drew Hutchison getting the nod at 7. The forwards consist of Max King and Pawasa Farmasili at front row, Reid Marnie at hooker, Viliami Kikau and Jacob Preston are the second rowers, and Jamin Salmon at lock. Their bench consists of Kurt Mann, Sam Hughes, Josh Curran and Curtis Morin. So now that we've got sort of the NRL squads, if you will, named, we can talk a bit more about them. In the terms of the Sharks, sort of players that stand out position-wise, CSF Talakai obviously getting named at centre. We sort of did think this was happen. I think it was always a pipe dream of Kale Ero getting that position. I think Talakai is an absolute gun, and I think people sort of gloss over that because of he's never hit the high of that game against the Seagulls again, but he averages 180, 190 metres from centre. He's got defensive deficiencies, that's for sure, but what he brings, I think, outweighs that definitely. So just thought we'd note him at centre there over Kale Ero. The forwards, Kaufusi and Hunt starting isn't what I expected. It is important to note that there's no Dale Finucane or Braden Hamlin-Uele named for these teams, who, both of whom could have been the starting front rowers, who knows. But it's still a very strong forward pack for the Sharkies. And, Cameron McInnes at lock. Again, Finucane could potentially take that spot, but based on what I said in my review, I'm hoping not. For the Bulldogs, there's a bit more to touch on. We get to see our first taste of Stephen Crichton at the Bulldogs, and as we sort of suspected, he has been named at centre, with Blake Taff getting another run at fullback. We've heard whispers of this the entire preseason, essentially. It seems like it's the way that the Bulldogs are going to go, but it is also important to note that in their reserves and whatnot, they are still missing players like Connor Tracy and the winger whose name escapes me. Jacob Kiraz hasn't been named either. So when they come back and they get named, there's potential that this all shuffles around a bit. But I get the feeling Stephen Crichton at centre and Blake Taff at 1 is the way that the Bulldogs are going to go. Drew Hutchison, I mentioned him briefly. He is getting the nod at halfback here with Toby Sexton in the reserves. Of course, it's a trial, so they'll both get game time out there, but it is important to note that if you are sort of getting named to start, you're probably ahead in the pecking order, but, a good game from Sexton could definitely dislodge that, especially because I thought Sexton played really well in the first week of the preseason challenge. Farmasili is getting the nod at run on front row. I mentioned him in the review. I was pretty confident he was on a development deal, but obviously he has been shot back up, and because of how well he played in that opening round of the preseason challenge, is getting another run at run on front row here with Sam Hughes coming off the bench. And Jamin Salmon, another one I was really impressed with in their first trial. He's getting the run at starting lock with Josh Curran coming off the bench. Again, preseason trials, good performances can dislodge other players, so we'll have to wait and see how it goes, but interesting thing to note. I'm not going to go read too deep into the reserves of each team's. A lot of sort of NRL and just bordering on NRL talent in there. Iro, Atkinson, Burns, etc. for the Sharkies. Well, for the Bulldogs, as we just mentioned, there's Toby Sexton, Jarrell Skelton, Beyond Iodo, etc. But we'll move on. Moving on to the Storm and the Knights, which takes place on the Saturday at 1:45 in Fiji, keep in mind. The Storm line up as Ryan Pappenhausen at fullback, Will Warbrick and Xavier Coates on the wings, Ramus Smith and Nick Meaney are the centres, Jonah Pezzett at 5'8", and Jerome Hughes at halfback. Tui Kamika is prop with Josh King, Harry Grant is the hooker, Kane Bradley gets a run at second row with Alessia Katoa, and Trent Liero is the lock. Off the bench, we have Christian Welch, Joe Chan, Tristan Powell, and Tyron Wishart. For the Knights, the fullback is the Dalian winner and Kalen Ponga. The wingers, Anari Tuala and Greg Marju. The centres are Dane Gagai and Bradman Best. Tyson Gamble is at 6 and Jackson Hastings is the halfback. In the forward department, we have Jacob Saifiti and Leo Thompson in the front row. Phoenix Crossland at 9. Tyson Frizzell and Dylan Lucas are the second rowers, and Adam Elliott is at lock. Their bench consists of Jack Cogger, Daniel Saifiti, Jack Hetherington, and Kai Pearce-Poore. Obviously, a few more things to touch on in this one. We get to see our first sort of shot of Nick Meaney in the centres for the Storm, which is really exciting. I've always been a big fan of Nick Meaney, and I think he can make a pretty seamless transition to the centres. Jonah Pezzett is at 6. Cameron Munster obviously not getting risked before round 1. Another one to note is Christian Welch is off the bench. We know he lost his captaincy for the Storm heading into 2024 and wasn't even named in the leadership group. So, there's been a few question marks around that, whether or not it was his decision, the Storm's decision, whatnot. But him at 14 could be telling that maybe he is a bit on the outer. But I also get the feeling that because this game is taking place in Fiji, that Kamakamika is getting the run-on spot just so he can run out in Fiji. So we'll have to see how this squad lines up in round 1, but definitely something to note there. Kane Bradley at second row. I'm not sure who they would normally go with here. It was obviously Trent Liero last season. You'd have to think Sean Bloor would get that spot, who, if we're looking at the reserves, has been named in the reserves. So we should get to see some game time from him. Jack Holworth also down there, Chris Lewis. A few options at second row, but it is interesting to note that Kane Bradley has been named in the run on second row. Moving on to the Knights. Anari Tuala seems to get first crack at that wing spot vacated by Dom Young, which we all sort of expected. Maybe Tom Jenkins was an outside chance, or even David Armstrong based on his performance, but you'd expect Anari Tuala had the inside running on that position. They've kept Gamble and Hastings in the halves. Kai Pearce-Poore, we get to see our first action of him off the bench. Dylan Lucas, of course, named at second row. So it'll be interesting to see how Kai Pearce-Poore gets a go. And Jack Cogger on that interchange bench as well. They've also got a few players in their reserves, of course. We should see all of these players as well. But Armstrong, Will Price, Brodie Jones, Fletcher Sharp, hope to see a bit of game time out of them too. Rest assured, we will not be hanging around too long on the Knights and Storm game, so we move on to the Warriors, who take on the Dolphins on Saturday at 3:45 p.m. The Warriors line up with Tane Tuapiki at 1, Dallin Watene-Zalesniak and Marcelo Montoya on the wings, Rocco Berry and Roger Tuivasa-Sheck in the centres, Luke Metcalf at 5'8", and Sean Johnson getting his first run at halfback for the year. The forwards are Anfanua Blake and Mitch Barnett in the props, Wade Egan at hooker, Jackson Ford and Kurt Capewell in second row, and Tohu Harris at lock. On the interchange, we have Freddie Lussick, Marata Niokore, Jazz Tavanga, and Bunty Afoa. The Dolphins line up as follows: Hamaso Tabuai Fido at fullback, Jermaine Asako and Jack Bostock on the wings, Tessie New and Herbie Farnworth are the centres, Isaiah Katoa at 5'8", and Sean O'Sullivan at halfback. Jesse Bromwich and Tom Flegler are your front rowers, Jeremy Marshall King at hooker, Felice Corfusi and Ewan Aitken are your second rowers, and Tom Gilbert is lock. The interchange consists of Mark Nichols, Valence Tafade, Jake Avarillo, and Kurt Donahue. So a few things to touch on here. Obviously, Tane Tuapiki getting the run at fullback. We heard rumours that CNK was struggling a bit with a hamstring injury, wasn't going to play this one, and is in a bit of doubt for round 1. You'd assume with Tane Tuapiki getting the name at 1, he will be the preferred option over Roger Tuivasa-Sheck, which I don't hate at all. I think everybody's sort of really trying to shoehorn Roger into that fullback role, which, definitely not a bad shout if the Warriors do it. But they want him to be centre. Why stuff around the wider squad by moving him around and him out of position? Let him work out combinations and let him sit at centre and give Tane a run at fullback. I'm all for it. In the forwards, expectedly, Jackson Ford gets the run at second row over Marata Niokore, who Kurt Capewell replaces. I sort of expected this. I always thought Ford was a bit more of a 80-minute second rower and didn't have that impact, while Marata Niokore can have that impact off the bench and even be used as a middle. So I always like the idea of moving Marata back to the bench. Not too much more to touch on for the Warriors. Metcalf is at 6, but, in the wider reserves, we do have Tamari Martin, Chanel Harris-Tavita. Even Dylan Walker is named at 18th man as well. So we'll see them get some action, and whoever has a good performance could still wrap up that 6th spot. In the Dolphins department, Jack Bostock is named at wing. Tessie New is at centre. That is how we sort of saw it unfold in the first week of the preseason challenge, but I expected Jake Averillo to end up playing centre in this one and Tessie New or Bostock to get that wing spot. By the looks of things, Averillo might be used as a bit of a bench option for the Dolphins this year, but of course, preseason, we'll have to see how they all line up round 1. But interesting to note that. Ewan Aitken is getting that first run at second row for the Dolphins, with Kenny Bromwich and Connolly Lemuelu in the reserves for the Dolphins. So, we'll get to see them have a run, but interesting to know Aitken seems to be ahead of them. Who knows? I can't imagine he's ahead of Kenny Bromwich or Lemuelu after last season. Moving on, however, we get to the Seagulls and the Broncos. Saturday, 5:55 p.m. Similar circumstances to the Rabbitohs and the Roosters game. These clubs obviously going to Vegas, so they've named players who aren't travelling with them to America. So, Seagulls. Bailey Hodgson is the fullback. Max Lehman and Watson Haleta are the wingers. Cameron Brown and Clayton Fulalo are the centres. Jamie Humphries at 6. Brandon Wakeham at 7. In the forwards, Toafofoa Sipley and Aitasi James are the props, with Gordon Chen Kum Tong at hooker, Brad Parker at second row with Ben Condon, and Dean Madison at lock. The interchange consists of Kobe Ruggless, Austin Diaz, Jacob Sykes, and James Urselli. We'll move on to the Broncos, but there's a few noticeable things in that Manly squad that we want to touch on. Broncos, number 1, Credence Toa. In the wing department, Jordan Pereira and Sione Hopawate. In the centres, Deloise Hueta and Ethan Kwai Ward. In the halves, we have Josh Rogers and Kurt Fours, who has obviously made his way down from the Panthers. The forwards consist of Bailey Butler and Ben Teakora, Blake Moser at hooker, Jaden Hunt and Ethan O'Neill are the second rowers, and Rory Ferguson at lock. Joseph Tamane, Joshua Stuckley, Cooper Page-Wilson and Joshua Patterson line up on the bench. All right, so there's a few notable ones here, despite the fact that the main squads of these teams will be headed to Vegas. We're going to see more of a look of Bailey Hodgson and Fualalo, who, of course, featured in that first trial game. I'm also interested to see how Jamie Humphries goes at 6. There's a lot of raps coming out of the Seagulls camp about him. Toafofoa Sipley gets the run at lock. He did get suspended for 3 games, but those only apply to the NRL season. So while he can no longer go to Vegas to represent them, he gets another shot in the trials here. Brad Parker, Hank Scorpio, gets his transition into the second row, which we all knew was coming. Interested to see how he goes in this one. Now, for the Broncos, of course, my boy Jordan Pereira. Love seeing him. Hope he brains it. They've got a couple of older heads in Rogers and Fours in the halves, who I think will steer them around really well. Takora, going to get another look of him. He was really good in that first trial, someone I forgot to sort of mention in my review. So it'll be really good to see how he goes. And that's sort of about it. Blake Moser, maybe we can mention him, but we sort of know what we expect of Blake Moser. It's interesting to note that in the reserves, there's only 2 each, because these squads are obviously, half of them are off to Vegas. But Corey Pakes has been left behind and has been named at 19th man. So he may have fallen to 4th choice hooker for the Broncos. Who knows? Just thought that was something interesting to note. Now, the next game, Saturday at 8:05 p.m, we have the Dragons and the Tigers. Dragons line up as follows: Tyrell Sloan at 1, Zach Lomax at 2, Moses Suley at 3, Jack Bird at 4, Michaeli Ravalawa at 5, Kyle Flanagan at 6, and Ben Hunt at 7. The forwards are Francis Molo and Blake Laurie in the front row, Jacob Little at hooker, Tom Eisenhuth at second row, Jaden Sewer at second row, and Jack DeBellin at lock. The interchange is Jesse Marshke, Viliami Fafita, Ben Murdoch-Masila and Raymond Faitala-Mariner. Now the Tigers line up with Jareem Buller at fullback, Charlie Staines and Junior Tupou are on the wings, Justin Olam and Stafford Toa are the centres, Jaden Sullivan and Aiden Caesar are 6 and 7, Stefano Utoikamanu and David Clemmer are the props, with Appy locking them down at hooker. We have Isaiah Papali'i and Asu Kapoa in the second row, and Alex Seyfarth gets another run at lock forward. On the interchange, we have Lachlan Galvin at 14, Alex Twal at 15, Fanua Pole at 16, and Samuela Fainu at 17. These are very close to, if not, how we expect these teams to line up, barring injury. There's not too much to note about this Dragons team. It's essentially the same side that ran out last week. Viliami Fafita and Raymond Faitala-Mariner are added to the bench. We get to see Raymond Faitala-Mariner's first action for the Dragons. And it's interesting to note that Jesse Marshke seems to maybe have the first shot at 14. But of course, in their reserves, they do have a host of good players, including Connor, I don't know why I try and say his name, Colin Mulheisen, who is the hooker, who I was very impressed with last week. The Tigers, Justin Olam gets his first run in Tigers colours. Sullivan and Caesar getting another shot at in the halves, with, of course, Lachlan Galvin. There's a lot of raps coming out of Tigers camp, especially just from the coach of Benji Marshall about him. He's getting the run at 14, so it'll be interesting to see how he goes. But not too much of note in their squad either. I want to keep flying through, so we'll move on to the next game, which, of course, is the Raiders and the Cowboys, taking place on Sunday, 3 p.m. Raiders line up with Albert Hopewate at fullback, Utaloa Osamoa and Xavier Savage on the wing, Matt Timoko and James Schiller are the centres, KO Weeks at 6 and Ethan Strange at 7. Josh Papali'i is at prop with Emre Gula, Danny Levi is the 9, Hudson Young and Elliot Whitehead are the second rowers, and Morgan Smithies is at lock. Off the bench, we have Tom Starling, Nick Chotrich, Trey Mooney and Jed Stewart. The Cowboys line up with Scott Drinkwater at fullback, Carl Felt and Murray Torlungi on the wings, Valentine Holmes and Zach Labour are the centres, Tom Dearden at 5'8" and Chad Townsend at halfback. The forwards consist of Jordan McLean at prop with Jason Taumalolo, Reece Robson is at hooker, Hallam Lukey and Jeremiah Nanai are the second rowers, and Ruben Cotter is at 13. The interchange is Jake Granville, Griffin Neame, Cohen Hess and Sam McIntyre. All right, with these teams, lots of interesting sort of ones. Hopewade getting the run at fullback. No signs of Jordan Rapana, not even in the reserves. I'm not too sure what's going on there, but interesting to see him in there at fullback. Of course, Chevy Stewart is named the 18th man and will get a run there, you'd expect. Other interesting things to note is Weeks and Strange line up at 5'8" and halfback again. They're obviously not risking their captain in Jamal Fogarty until round 1, and I think it's still going to be a bit of a shootout between these two to see who gets that 6th jersey come round 1. In the forward department, we get to see our first taste of Morgan Smithies, who I'm very excited to see. I think he's going to be exactly the sort of player that the Raiders sort of build off. And in the reserves, I said I wouldn't talk about him too much, but of course my boy Mitch Henderson, love to see him in there, and Zach Hosking, who of course made the move to Canberra early this preseason. So it'll be good to see him get his first shot. In terms of the Cowboys, it's essentially exactly how we thought this team would line up. There is no sign of Luciano Leilua. Is he in the reserves? No. So you'd expect he is out. He's up and gone by now, Leilua. Sam McIntyre did get the spot on the bench, which is how I predicted things to happen. And Cotter is at 13 now with Lolo at prop, which I thought is sort of how that was going to be headed anyway. Anyway, we move on to the Titans and the Eels, which I believe is the final game. It is indeed. So this game is taking place Sunday at 5 p.m, 25th of February. Titans line up Keanu Keeney at fullback, Alofiana Khan Pereira and Philip Sammy on the wing, Brian Kelly and AJ Brimson in the centres. Kieran Foran is 6 and Tanner Boyd is 7. Moeki Fodawaka at prop with Keenan Paliasia, Sam Verrills at 9. Jacob Alick and Beau Fermor are the second rowers, and Tino Fasul Malaawi at lock. On the bench, we have Chris Randall, Jamin Jolliffe, Aaron Clark, and Cleese Haas. In terms of the Parramatta Eels, we have Clinton Gutherson. Clinton? That feels weird saying Clinton. Clint Gutherson lining up at fullback with Micah Sevo and Sean Russell on the wings. Will Penasini and Bailey Simonson are your centres. Dylan Brown at 5'8", Mitchell Moses at fullback. In the forward department, Regan Campbell-Gillard lines up with Junior Paulo in the front row. Joey Lussick is hooker. Sean Lane and Bryce Cartwright are the second rowers, and Jaman Hopgood is at lock. On the bench, we have Brendan Hands, Rumu Gregg, Joe Offa-Hengawi, and Kalma Tolangi. A few things to note in this one as well. Of course, Jaden Campbell still injured, potentially missing the first couple rounds of the NRL season. So Keanu Keeney gets that shot at fullback, and I think he will brain it. We're going to see our first taste of AJ Brimson at centre in this one. I'm excited to see how he goes. It's interesting to note that, Tino is at lock, and they're opting to use Paliasia as a starting front rower, which could mean some really good things for Supercoach, but we'll have to see how this trial goes. Not too much more to note for the Titans, so we'll move on to the Eels. Their backline is exactly how we expected things, and honestly, their forward pack is too, minus maybe Joey Lussick getting the run at 9. Hands is at 14, which, sort of bodes against the whole 80-minute hooker that Brad Arthur wants, but hey, it's a trial match. I'm sure he just wants to get a bit of runs on the board for both of them. But maybe we were a bit preemptive in thinking Hands was the lock for number 9 and Joey Lussick was second in line, because Joey Lussick has been named to start here. Or maybe it's just because they wanted to give each of them a game to solidify themselves and just went off that. Who knows? We'll have to find out. In the reserves, it's interesting to note Ryan Madison is on the reserves for the Parramatta Eels. You'd expect him to obviously start in this side. Not sure where it is. Maybe Kalma Talangi drops out, but thought we'd better note him. And for the Titans, there's not too much of note. A lot of players we saw in last week's trial who make up their squad. So that is sort of all that we've got for these team lists. This video has gone... Video? Oh, geez. I feel like I'm doing YouTube. This podcast has gone for a lot longer than I sort of intended it to, but I think we've covered a lot. I thought we've sped through right well. Right well? God, I'm struggling. Look, we're off the cuff. I'm ready to wind down. So let's end this one. Let me know what you guys sort of think about these podcasts. Of course, if you're not following the Instagram, we do have an Instagram for this page. We can find a lot more visual content, a lot more Supercoach related stuff we've been getting into in there, and you can just interact with me a bit more in there. So let me know what you're sort of thinking about these teams, and I will catch you guys in the next podcast.